So just that, or I was tired of working. Kind of like what's the talk about Derrick Broze. I didn't even think about everything. So now I know she's there. Think of like, oh yeah, she's a perfect lady. Like, oh, we get her that somebody pops up. Yeah, it's fun. She was talking about her. I didn't bring it up. She right. Like, I don't know, did all this stuff. Like, oh shit. I was like, I knew what you was doing. You got your problems. But anyway, another thing that is not just money that interested me about her, is that she was and she, she got turned on like Houstonian insurance. Weird stuff. I can get this lady over here. Put that room. Move those things.
My surprise rate that or 40.
It's maybe like dirty love.
She's the one that brought most of my gray hairs.
That's on Facebook,
Oh, yeah.
so it's just to the dirt.
Oh, yeah, I know about that.
So that's going live right now. Hey everybody, we're gonna get started in just a few moments. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're here at the G Spot Art Gallery in case you wanna make your way over here.
Yeah, we'll get started this tomorrow.
We don't need that table. We don't need that there. You're right. That is frozen.
She's already looking at it.
Yeah,
That's All right, everybody, we're going to start in about 5 minutes. And if anybody's interested, we are live streaming on Facebook right now. If you want to share that with your friends. I'm going to go ahead and get started. But first, everybody, make sure to say hi to Rosie back there and get some cake balls and awesome. Thank you, Rosie, for being here. And thank you to Doria for helping us get to the gallery tonight.
Thank you guys for having me.
Like I said, we are live streaming on the Derrick Broze, the Mayor of Houston Facebook page. If anybody wants to share it with friends or tag them. That good stuff. And
Other than that, we are passing around this sheet here. If anybody's interested, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but some of you, maybe most of you know that I'm also running for mayor, and this is a part of the issue that I'm talking about. So if you're interested in adding your name to our list, and your phone number, we're trying to do a text list so that we can contact you. Let's just tell you when we have events coming up.
Oh, Kira, are you okay?
Sorry, technical difficulty. But yeah, if you're interested in signing up for a text list, you can sign this. All right, so I was trying to work on a PowerPoint for tonight, but it just didn't work out. It was a little too late in the day, and I hope that I'll be interesting enough to entertain you guys without pictures to look at.
Uh-oh.
No, it's not done. So tonight, what I'm going to present to you guys is basically the culmination of a year's worth of research that I've been doing into what started was researching 5G, noticing that there's a number of concerns, that there are more and more people asking questions about what 5G is, and people asking questions about cell phones in general, and I started looking into this last September. I started asking questions on local level in October of last year, and I've just been producing documents, documentaries, reports, articles. I've probably written more than 2,000 articles on this topic. I've made 20 different plus videos looking into the local issue here in Houston as well as the kind of bigger picture. And so tonight's going to touch on all of that. It's a fairly big presentation, so I hope you guys will be taking notes if you're interested, because what we're going to look at tonight, we're going to look at first, what are EMFs? What is an EMF? What is the technology behind cell phones and all the things that we use, laptops? And then we're going to make our way to 5G. We're going to look at the history of the differences between the different generations of cellular technology. We're going to talk about the FCC and sort of the governmental side of things as far as why the situation is this way. And then we're going to look at the concerns with 5G. We're going to look at the health concerns, the privacy concerns, the local power concerns, the environmental concerns, and some other ideas. And then we're going to talk about solutions, what you can do for your own kind of personal self, what you can do for your family, what you can do for your home, and then what you can do out in public. Because there are some options. There are limited options, but we do have some options. All right. So before I do that, though, for those who are unaware, and you're kind of maybe wondering what my qualifications are for this, I am a journalist, I'm a researcher. As I said, I've been working on this for over a year. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a health professional in any way, but as a journalist, I gather data and I interview those who are doctors, who are health professionals, and who are experts in these fields, so that I can gain a better understanding and share that understanding with other people. So like I said, this is basically a year's worth of material packed into one presentation. And if for anybody who's looked into this topic, you'll realize how big it is. And there may be some things I don't touch on tonight because otherwise we'll be here until 10 or 11 o'clock tonight. So I tried to take what I see as the most important elements of this story. What is 5G? How is it affecting us on local level? How is it affecting our health? How is it affecting our privacy, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So I'm just calling this What is 5G? Questions, concerns, and of course solutions. So we're going to start with what is an EMF, because that's sort of the technology and the basis for our entire conversation. So EMF can stand for an electromagnetic frequency or an electromagnetic field. And an electromagnetic frequency specifically is basically a measure of how many times a wave has a peak as it passes through, a certain area. So basically, like they measure this in hertz per second, for example. So whenever your cell phone is sending out waves to the cell tower, the peak of that wave is counted, and you basically count the frequency of that. That's called electromagnetic frequency. And every device that we have, smartphone, radio, AM radio, microwave, laptop, all these devices have a different electromagnetic frequency and electromagnetic field, right? So that's sort of the basis for everything we're going to talk about. And the range of these possible frequencies, everything from the field and the frequencies that the sun puts out and things in space, all the way down to the microwave and the cell phone, that entire thing is known as the electromagnetic spectrum, right? So we're going to look at, what we're focused on today is our radio waves, which is where cell phones are, which is where 5G is, microwaves, and then the further you go, the waves, you get out to like gamma rays and things in space, so that sort, right? And as we're going to explore today, the traditional thinking, or what we've been told, what most of us have been taught, is that once you pass a certain part of the spectrum, you get to what they call non-ionizing radiation. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And that, we've been told, means it's safe and that there's no concerns. The only concerns are like the X-rays, the gamma rays, you know, radiation in space and X-rays, and that's why they make you put on the little thing when you go to an X-ray at the dentist or something. But we've been told once you cross over a certain part of the spectrum, TVs, microwaves, cell phones, these sort of things cause no harm, and there's no reason to worry about that. And as I'm going to show you guys, it's a little bit different than what we've been taught. So the electromagnetic spectrum is divided into separate bands. As I said, this spectrum goes by different names: radio wave, which is where we're focused on; microwave, infrared, visible light is the visible light spectrum, what our eyes can pick up; ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays. Like I said, the radiation from space and things of that sort. So gamma rays, X-rays, and other ultraviolet light are classified, as I said, as ionizing radiation. And what that means is that we are told that this type of radiation has enough energy to ionize our atoms, so basically to affect you down to the DNA level. But as I said, we're typically told this only applies to X-rays, to gamma rays, and to ultraviolet light from the sun, for example, in high doses. And that can ionize your atoms, which causes chemical reactions, and it can cause breakdown, health in different ways. Radiation poisoning, the thing that most of you have heard of. But then once you go further on the spectrum, we're told that it's non-ionizing, which means it doesn't ionize your cells, your atoms, and thus doesn't cause harm. So this is radio waves, microwaves, things of this sort. And that's what we've been told. Cell phones, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and 5G, which we're going to talk about tonight, these all operate on the part of the spectrum, which are microwaves. So they're part of the larger electromagnetic spectrum, but on a very specific band. And 5G is an even more specific band of that spectrum, right? So that's kind of it. When we get into the science of the health aspect, just remember that it's just like a really brief science lesson that you probably all heard explained much better in the past. But yeah, that's what we're dealing with. Electromagnetic spectrum, it's all around us. Our cell phones are constantly putting it off. Unless you turn yours on airplane mode, or like mine is, or turn it off, then it's constantly putting out this frequency, this EMF. All right. So we're going to get some more background now on the law with cell phones. Because cell phones have been in existence since the late 70s, as far as the military goes, and then the public in late 70s, early 80s, then by the 90s, where we're getting to now. So by 1996, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, passed what is known as the Telecommunications Act. Telecommunications Act of 1996. And this was passed as an effort, they said, to update the law around the emerging internet technology. So 1996, the internet was there, but it wasn't anywhere as it is today, but it was the very beginning. And so they said they wanted to start to regulate the internet and growing broadband technology, as well as to limit AT&T from becoming a monopoly. That was the reason we were told that this 1996 Telecommunications Act was passed 23 years ago. Unfortunately, what it really was the beginning of the loss of local power. And as we're going to explore tonight, this is something that has continued up till today, how the federal government through the FCC, the state of Texas, and now on the local level have all worked to remove your ability as residents to have a say on how these towers are rolled out. And this has been taking place since 1996. So when you look at it, the situation we're dealing with today is actually just the result of a situation that was already corrupt from the very beginning. The Telecommunications Act was partially written by the industry. And the act prohibits, so this is 1996, from the very beginning, this is from the Telecommunications Act itself, it says it prohibits local jurisdictions from considering perceived health effects when taking an action on a proposed facility. So if somebody comes into your neighborhood and they want to install a cell site, per the 1996 Telecommunications Act, you cannot study it based on health concerns. Instead, cities and towns can only regulate the cell sites based on aesthetic. So if you say it's ugly, you don't like the way it looks, then you have more of an argument than you do based on health, which is kind of backwards to a lot of people. Most people come to this issue because they're concerned about health, but honestly, legally speaking, the health argument is the weakest one because they won't allow you to really make an argument in court. Now, this is from Section 704 of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Quote, no state or local government may regulate the placement, construction, and modification of personal wireless service facilities on the basis of the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions. So right there it's saying from the beginning, no state or locality can decide where they want these cell sites based on environmental concerns or health concerns and things like that. So that was written in 1996. And that's the law that all the way up till today, in 2019, 23 years later, that 5G, the internet, and everything is still under this 1996 Telecommunications Act. So one of the arguments that many people make is that the act is outdated. It's 23 years old. It was based on cell phone technology that was existing in the 90s. And here we are moving into 5G, the Internet of Things, and smart devices everywhere. So the big argument is that it's basically just an inefficient law in the first place. And another thing is, we're going to get into some of the studies here in a moment. And some studies have already shown negative health effects, even at the levels that the FCC allows based on the 1996 Telecommunications Act. So again, the act from the very beginning already started to make it where localities were going to be limited and how they could regulate or slow down the rollout of cell sites. And some studies have shown the levels that they allow of radiation, of EMR, electromagnetic radiation, are already causing trouble. So that's something to keep in mind. So the loss of local power that we were discussing, this was only made worse in last year, September 2018. The FCC passed what they called the small cells rule. And this basically was part of the 5G rollout. They said, in order for us to move towards 5G, this coming future that we're about to get into, we have to make sure that no local government can slow it down. They've argued that certain cities and certain neighborhoods try to charge too much money. So if they try to come roll out a cell site with a tower near your kid's school, they're worried that an HOA or some kind of neighborhood organization is going to try to charge them, whatever they want to place it there. So the FCC helped them out, and they passed a rule that says localities can't decide what they want to charge. And then just a couple months ago, Trump issued a executive order where he said that in order to speed up the 5G rollout, cities now have only 90 days to approve new cell sites. So you can't test it for health, you can't test it for environmental concerns, and you have 90 days to basically say yes, and you can't decide how much to charge. So cities are very extremely limited in any way that they can actually try to fight and push back or call for studies and tests and things of that sort. And the Trump administration also initiated a cap, again, another cap on the fees that local governments can charge. So, think about this, even if you didn't think there was health concerns and you said, well, this company wants to come build a tower in our neighborhood, in our community, it's going to be a big eyesore. Well, we should at least get some money for it so we can, beautify the neighborhood or something like that. Well, you can't even get that. They've limited the amount of fees that a neighborhood or a city can charge to try to get a return on that investment. So this is, to me, is just a really good example of this branch of the federal government, the FCC, working with the industry. What some people are starting to call big wireless or big telecom, Verizon and others. And the organization behind most of these companies, it's called the CTIA, the Cellular Telephone Internet Association. It's basically the big lobby that helps pass all these bills that are, in favor of the cellular industry. All right, so now we get to what is 5G. We talked about the spectrum. We talked about a little bit of background about what the FCC is involved in and how their laws from the very beginning set this corruption in place. So 5G is simply just the name for the 5th generation of cellular technology. It's the next wave of the devices that they want to roll out. So first generation, 1G, was what they were calling analog wireless, and it started to emerge in 1979 and the 1980s. And this is just super basic giant phones, the brick phones, the huge phones, right? Second generation, 2G, came out in the early 90s, and this was cell phones with basic texting. And then towards the mid 90s, you start getting some pictures. And then 3G, and most of us are familiar with that. That came out in about 1998. 3G was the beginning of smartphones. You had some internet capabilities, you had some video capabilities, and you could send pictures, right? And then we get to where we're at now, 4G, the 4th generation of cellular technology, which allows for instant streaming and downloads and apps. And this came about in 2008. So it seems basically every 10 years or so, they're introducing a new G, a new generation. And now we're up to 5G. Which has started to roll out in places like Houston as of last fall. Houston was one of the first 9 cities that was getting 5G from Verizon in the country, and that started October 2018. And they're estimating that within the next 2 years, by the end of 2020, that the entire country will be blanketed by 5G. And at least one FCC member has estimated it's going to take the installation of 800,000 new towers and cell sites across the country for it to work seamlessly. So as I said, it's just the 5th generation of cellular technology. And the thing about 5G is going from 4G to 5G, it's not only different in the type of frequency that we're using. So 5G operates on what are known as millimeter waves. Anybody here ever go to the airport and fly and go through that little body scanner machine? You know, the thing I don't go through it either, but you know what I'm talking about, right? So when there was a pushback of that a couple of years ago, that uses the same exact technology. Those are millimeter waves. And if anybody remembers when those things started to come out, people were worried about skin cancer and things because millimeter waves are absorbed by the skin. They penetrate and absorb into the skin. So there was a big concern about that. There was even some TSA unions that were filing lawsuits and things. So 5G operates on the exact same spectrum, what are known as millimeter waves. And these millimeter waves, they travel very short distances. They only travel about 200 to 500 feet. They're also easily blocked. So a tree can block the signal, a wall can block the signal. So in order for 5G to operate in this future world that they're talking about, in order for driverless cars and smart homes and smart everything and virtual reality and augmented reality and sensors in the streets for pollution and for lights and all this kind of stuff, in order for that to happen, they're going to have to install these cell sites, what they call small cells, which sometimes can be about the size of a backpack, sometimes about the size of a refrigerator, and sometimes they install brand new poles. What they're trying to do more recently is find existing poles and just, you'll see some new kind of thing sticking off it. It'll be a 5G tower. So in order for this to operate, they have to, pass that around if you want. Karen's got a picture of, if you feel like it. And in order for 5G to operate, they have to install these towers, these cell sites, every 200 to 500 feet. So if you think about this block, the end of the block here, that would be a tower right there, or a cell site there, and one at the end of this block here. So it's literally going to be every block, every corner of every part of the city where 5G is rolling out. Verizon has already started to roll it out in some test neighborhoods, Acres Home, a couple of parts of downtown. Sprint recently started rolling theirs out over in the Memorial area on the west side of town, and they're starting to blanket that. So you have Sprint and Verizon kind of spreading through the city with their 5G. So in order for that future that they're promising, which they're calling the Internet of Things, which is the tens and thousands of different sensors, because we're not just going to have smartphones and laptops. They want smart toasters and smart fridges and the Alexas and all these different things in an interconnected world. We're going to talk about some of the implications that has for privacy as well in just a moment. And so, as I said, the switch from 4G to 5G, it's not just it's nothing like going from 2G to 3G or 3G to 4G. This is an exponential leap. This is a paradigm shift that's going to completely change the way that the whole world's going. Some people are telling you it's going to be for the better. It's going to help. They're saying it's going to help in the medical industry. It's going to help in all these great ways. You'll be able to download your movies and all these kinds of things. But at the same time, there's a number of growing concerns. And I think it's important to realize that I honestly don't think there's such a huge demand for this. I feel like this is an industry-driven demand to push people to the next G, the next generation. I don't really hear a lot of people complaining that their speeds aren't fast enough already. That it's like I need to stream at a second faster or something. And it's really interesting to see how it's happening. But so the switch from 4G to 5G is just going to be this monumental leap, because as I said earlier, they're expecting the installation of 800,000 new cell sites. So just imagine that, 800,000 across the country. And it's already starting to take place. And the other difference is that 5G uses a much higher frequency. It's in the 10 to 300 gigahertz range. And we'll talk some more about what that range is associated with. And it should also be noted that studies have found harmful effects from the previous generations as well. We're going to talk about this in a moment. So we're focused on 5G because it's the latest thing going on. But the reality is that studies have already found problems with 2G and 3G and 4G. Those have already been linked to health problems. So we're going into a completely new arena of this type of technology, and they want to install hundreds of thousands of new towers. And the current technology that we're already using is already having an effect on us. Also, as I mentioned, 5G is using millimeter waves, and this is going to take a number of new towers. All right, so now we're going to talk about the concerns. And the concerns, I break them down in a number of ways. We have health concerns, we have privacy concerns, we have the local power concerns, we have the environmental concerns, and we're going to talk about all those. I'll start with health because I think that's probably the biggest part of the whole story. So when it comes to the health, let's start with this. There have been hundreds of scientists from around the world who have signed an appeal. This is based in the European Union. It's called the 5G Appeal. If you go to the website 5gappeal.eu, you can find all about it. But these scientists from a number of different fields and different backgrounds are calling for a global moratorium on 5G until there's further testing. So we'll start right there. And also you should note that Scientists in Belgium and different cities, Belgium just recently banned it in Brussels because they wanted to slow down and wait to do a study. And that's one thing that I'm running for mayor, I'm campaigning on this issue, but also there's a group called Houstonians concerned with 5G. For those who haven't heard about it, there's a group on Facebook. And I think the main goal that most of us are saying is, why is this happening without proper studies or without, on the local level, any sort of impact assessment on what's going to take place? Because as I mentioned, these waves are easily blocked. We're going to talk about it when we get to the environment. One of the costs of this 5G is going to be the loss of a lot of trees around Houston, because they're going to be cutting trees down in order to install new towers to make sure that this operates correctly. So we have scientists from around the world. This is part of their statement. It says, quote, "We, the undersigned, scientists and doctors, recommend a moratorium on the rollout of the 5th generation 5G for telecommunication until the potential hazards for human health and the environment have been fully investigated by scientists independent from the industry. 5G will substantially increase exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic fields on top of 2G, 3G, 4G, and Wi-Fi, etc." Because that's one thing to note. It's not like they're going back and they're going to start taking down the towers that we've been using for 4G and 3G. All the 5G stuff is going to be built on top of everything else that already exists. So you already have studies and concerns related to just normal cell towers, and there's increasing amount of studies talking about the dangers of Wi-Fi and things like that we're going to talk about. So it's not like that's going to go away and then you have a new fear of 5G. 5G is just going to be added on top of everything. So they continue, it says, it's going to be on top of Wi-Fi, etc., for telecommunications already in place. And radio frequency electromagnetic fields have been proven to be harmful for humans and the environment. And that's from the 5G appeal, like I said, signed by hundreds of scientists. There's also a group called Physicians for Safe Technology that have spoken out about 5G as well, and also equally calling for a moratorium, which basically means they say we should just slow down, exercise the scientific precautionary principle, and study something before just rolling it out. Because, I mean, it sounds a little bit extreme to say, but at the end of the day, if something's rolling out around the country, around the city, around the state without very much testing, then we pretty much are part of an experiment. That down the line we'll get to find out, okay, well, maybe they were right, maybe they were wrong, maybe it was much worse than we thought, maybe it wasn't as bad, or it affects us in different ways that we didn't think of. But we'll never know that until they study it. They're studying it right now as they roll it out on us. And I think that's important to know. So last November, there was a huge study that was released by the government, by the National Toxicology Program. And this study, which it was a 10-year, $30 million study, it concluded that there is clear evidence of radio frequency radiation causing brain and heart tumors, and they found these in male lab rats. So they tested rats like they often do, and they basically blasted these rats from birth till their death with high amounts of radiation. And the $30 million study, as I said, it took 10 years, and it looked at the long-term effects of high exposure to radio frequency radiation. Now, when this came out, there were people who were kind of celebrating this, like, hey, here's the evidence we need that we've been saying. This study, though, focused on 2G and 3G, so not even 5G. So 2G and 3G, 10-year study, $30 million, finds an increase in tumors, in male rats, heart and brain tumors. And the researchers wrote, quote, "There was also some evidence of tumors in the brain and the adrenal gland of exposed male rats. For female rats and male and female mice, the evidence was equivocal as to whether cancers observed were associated." John Butcher, who's PhD, he's the senior scientist in the study, said the exposures used in the studies, now this is where they basically, part of the team that was involved in the study said there's no reason to worry about, you shouldn't associate this with 5G. This is what they are telling the public, at least some of the team. The team is kind of split in the way they went about this. The study came out, and this scientist said the exposures in this study cannot be compared directly to the exposure that human beings experience with cell phones. In our studies, rats and mice received radio frequency radiation across their whole bodies, and he also notes that the lowest exposure level used in the study was equal to the maximum local tissue exposure currently allowed for cell phone users. So what he's saying there is that they tested these rats, they put them in these cages basically, and these metal boxes, and just blasted them like for 9 hours a day, their full body, with radiation. And they got tumors, and some of them did, some of them didn't, some of them lived even after the tumors. There's different things that happen. And they say that this is only 2G and 3G, but they don't want it to be compared to the current cell phones that are used. When I see this, and some other researchers who've seen this, some other scientists have said, well, actually, it seems like a pretty good representation of 5G, because the thing about 2G and 3G, that's just the phone that you put to your head every now and then. But as we talked about with 5G, there's going to be towers and cell sites all around us. We're going to be swimming in what some people are calling like a digital soup or a digital smog, and just be constantly bombarded by these things. And that is essentially what they simulated in this study. If you think about it, being surrounded full time, because they said, well, this shouldn't apply to cell phones because we focused on their full body, but that's what 5G is going to do. You can't really avoid it if it's on every single block. So the final report from the National Toxicology Program, it represents the opinion of the full team and a panel of scientific experts. So their full team plus another panel of scientific experts. And they said that the only way to avoid health concerns, this is written in their health advisory, is for people to, they said basically, quote, use speaker mode or headset to place more distance between your head and the cell phone, or reduce the amount of time you use your cell phone. That's their recommendation. Either talk on speaker or stop using the phone. That's pretty much, and I think that they're trying to avoid getting into a political fight and also a public freak out of telling people that, you know, how important this study really is. And of course, the FDA stepped in and said that they don't support the conclusions and that there's nothing wrong with cell phones and people shouldn't worry about it, you shouldn't worry about 5G, etc. However, there was another scientist, former senior toxicologist, Ronald Melnick, who was part of the environmental toxicology program, and he was the one who helped design this study, this National Toxicology Program study from 2018 that cost $30 million for them to complete. And he said this in response to the FDA saying that this study is, you know, bunk and that people shouldn't be concerned. He said, simply claiming that conclusions about human risk cannot be drawn from animal studies runs counter to standard practices of evaluating human cancer risks by all public health agencies. Because the FDA said, hey, this is rats, it should be applied to humans. But that's pretty much how all studies are done. They start with rats, sometimes they go up to other animals, and because of our similar biology, you know, they typically say if something happens to a rat, there's a pretty good chance it's going to happen to a human being as well. And this is what he's saying, is that this is standard practice for the EPA, the NTP, the FDA, and in an opinion piece that he wrote for the Hill website, he said every chemical known to cause cancer in humans is also carcinogenic in animals when adequately tested. So he's making a point like, look, they're trying to dismiss this and say, because it's rats, you shouldn't be worried about it. And he also notes that Dr. Shurin, one of the other doctors in there, neglects to note that the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is a part of the World Health Organization, in 2011, they concluded that cell phones were likely carcinogen, or they called it possible human carcinogen, based largely on findings of the increased risk of glioma and Schwann cell tumors in the brain near the ears after a long-term cell phone use. So, you know, the FDA claims don't pay attention to this study. $30 million study over 10 years with a team of scientists from around the world saying that 2G and 3G leads to an increase in tumors in rats with high exposure, but don't pay attention to it. It has no reason. It doesn't associate with cell phones. It has nothing to do with 5G. But if you want to be safe, talk on speakerphone or don't put your phone near your ear. So I think that's probably about as open as we're going to get them to come to with talking about this as far as the actual government itself. And this is what the doctor said finally about 5G in relation to that study. He said, 5G is an emerging technology that hasn't really been defined yet. From what we understand, it likely differs dramatically from what we study. Consequently, I believe that new wireless technologies, including 5G, should be adequately tested before their implementation leads to unacceptable levels of human exposures and increased health risks. So again, the precautionary principle. He's not saying it's going to fry your brain or, you know, kill you or anything. He's just saying it's probably a wise move for us to test this new technology before we just roll it out on the people. Now, as I mentioned, I've interviewed a number of experts. One of them that I've interviewed, I'm going to quote from him. His name is Dr. Martin Paul. He's from Washington State University. He's a professor emeritus of biochemistry and basic medical sciences. So this is not just, he's not just some YouTuber or some, you know, random guy online. This is somebody who's in this field. He's one of the most outspoken people about these concerns. As I said, he's a professor emeritus of biochemistry and basic medical sciences at Washington State University. He's widely published on the effects of electromagnetic fields. He's an expert in wireless radiation. And he has published 7 studies showing that there exists a sensitivity to electromagnetic fields in each cell of our body. And he gets, in the interview I did with him, he gets very much into the specifics of how this mechanism works. It's beyond my expertise to try to pretend like I can explain it adequately. But what he does say is that it affects us down to the cellular level. and it calcifies the cells and can start breaking them down. Despite, as I said earlier, this being non-ionizing technology, and the government and many government agencies saying that non-ionizing means safe. Despite that, Dr. Martin Paul and others are finding effects from EMFs on the cellular level. And he says that the effects of EMFs on the body were first documented 46 years ago. If you were to look into, by the way, all the notes that I'm kind of talking from, I have this saved in the PDF, and I can send it to anybody who wants it afterwards. But 46 years ago, the U.S. Office of Naval Medical Research published a study in 1971 talking about the effects of electromagnetic fields. So when people out there saying that we don't know whether 5G is going to do this, or we don't know what the effects of the EMFs, we actually do already. There were studies done by the Russians in the 70s that are publicly available. There's a pretty good breadth of information that's widely available for those who look into it. But what we're told is either it's safe or we don't know yet, and I think that's kind of false. So I'm going to read you briefly. There's 14 points that Dr. Martin Paul said. These are 14 different ways that EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies, and radiation from cell phones and Wi-Fi and others affect our bodies. He said this leads to various neurological and neuropsychiatric effects, including changes in the brain structure and function. Number 2, at least 8 different endocrine effects, hormonal effects. Number 3, cardiac effects, including influencing the electrical control of the heart, including changes in ECGs, producing arrhythmias, changes that can be life-threatening. Number 4, chromosome breaks and other changes in the chromosome structure. Number 5, histological changes in the testes. It is definitely a fertility issue for men. There are some studies showing women, but the studies that have been done are more conclusive with men. Like, if you're carrying your laptop on your lap, like you're frying your sperm pretty much. So 6, cell death. 7, lowered male fertility, including lowered sperm quality and function, and also lowered female fertility. And he said that needs to be studied more for the females to get more conclusive evidence. Oxidative stress, changes in calcium fluxes and calcium signaling, cellular DNA damaging, including single-strand breaks and double-strand breaks in cellular DNA, cancer, which is likely to involve these DNA changes, therapeutic effects, including stimulation of bone growth, cataract formation, breakdown of the blood-brain barrier, and finally, melatonin depletion and sleep disruption. That's one that we're going to touch on. So he also has published a study called Wi-Fi. Well, the full title is Wi-Fi is an Important Threat to Human Health, and he looks at all the effects of Wi-Fi, and it was published in the Journal of Environmental Health. You can find that one, Dr. Martin Paul. And now another doctor who's been pretty outspoken on this is Dr. Sharon Goldberg. She's practiced medicine for 21 years. She actually spoke in front of the Michigan House Energy Policy Committee in October 2018. She testified about this when they were starting to roll out 5G in Michigan. And she said the following: wireless radiation has biological effects, period. This is no longer a subject for debate when you look at the PubMed and the peer-reviewed literature. These effects are seen in all life forms: plants, animals, insects, and microbes. In humans, we have clear evidence of cancer now. There is no question. We have evidence of DNA damage, cardiomyopathy, which is the precursor of congestive heart failure, neuropsychiatric effects. 5G is an untested application of a technology that we know is harmful. We know it from the science. In academics, this is called human subjects research. So again, we're the experiment. That was Dr. Sharon Goldberg, if you want to look her up. She, for 21 years, has practiced medicine focusing on internal medicine, and that was her testimony in front of the Michigan House last fall. Another doctor who's been pretty outspoken, Dr. Deborah Davis. She founded the nonprofit Environmental Health Trust, which is an organization that I recommend as a great resource for wireless EMF radiation information. And she's been involved in raising awareness about the environmental and health hazards related to radiation. She started in Wyoming. She's promoted policies locally, nationally, and internationally. She is a visiting professor of medicine at the Hebrew University Medical School. She's authored more than 200 publications and books and journals, ranging from the Lancet to the Journal of American Medical Association to Scientific American. So again, somebody with the background, somebody that's got some degrees on the wall that I don't have. And this is what she said in a recent piece that she wrote. Russians' 50 years of research, again, I mentioned there have been studies already done in Russia years ago. Russians' 50 years of research on electromagnetic radiation since the Cold War has led to their clear understanding that this exposure does have biological effects. The Russian National Committee on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection issued a 2011 resolution recommending that persons under the age of 18 not use a cell phone. So that was issued in 2011 by the Russian National Committee on Non-Ionizing Radiation. And I have links to all this information. Another woman associated with the Environmental Health Trust that I actually did interview, you can find an interview with myself and her online. She's the executive director for the Environmental Health Trust, and she's basically helped develop international policy that documents the effects of electromagnetic radiation. She's raised the wireless health issue in Maryland. She was doing a lot of work in Maryland. So I'm just giving you guys names of people you might want to look up and look into. Now, there are also other studies that have focused on cell phones themselves. And as we're going to get into this sort of fight to raise awareness about cellular technology and EMFs, it's being compared more and more to the fight against big tobacco and cigarettes in the 40s and 50s, because there was a really great article by The Nation magazine that came out last year. It's called "How Big Wireless Convinced Us That Cell Phones Are Safe." And it was a really great piece, and it did some good investigative work. And the nonprofit organization Project Censored named that article, "How Big Wireless Convinced Us Cell Phones Are Safe," the top 8 censored story of 2018. Because they said it's that important, it's being covered up. And again, they compared it to big tobacco, buying out scientists, buying out the whole industry, and convincing people that cigarettes were safe and they didn't cause any problems and this and that. This is the new industry. You have to understand that the 5G rollout, there are people who stand to make billions and trillions of dollars off this rollout being completed. And over the coming years, insane amounts of money once the new technology finishes. So there's a huge pushback on that. So it's not just 5G, it's the EMFs in general, and we're going to get to the solutions, but I just want to note that. So here's one study that focuses more on just cell towers. This was published by the Kaiser Permanente. It was about miscarriages for women near cell phone towers. This is based in San Francisco. And the study involved hundreds of pregnant women in the Bay Area and found that those who were more exposed to the type of radiation produced by cell phones, wireless networks, and power lines were nearly 3 times likely to have a miscarriage. This Kaiser Permanente study, published in the journal Scientific Reports, did not show definitively that what was causing the higher pregnancies was related to cell phones or EMFs, but they said that this study underscores the need for more research. So again, they weren't saying like, look, we can conclusively say this 3 times likely, increase in miscarriages is because of the cell tower, but they did note that all the women were living near towers. All the women who had miscarriages happened to be living near the towers as well. So that's some recent research in the last couple years. So it's not just doctors and scientists, though, that are speaking out about this. We have some politicians who are proving that they care a little bit and they're making an effort. I mentioned that Dr. Sharon Goldberg had testified in the Michigan State Senate. We also have Michigan State Senator Patrick Colbert. He spoke out about the rollout of 5G technology, and this is a quote from him. He said, quote, "The health of our public is supposed to be a matter of primary public concern. We are now seeing that the adverse health impacts associated with wireless radiation are severe and include cancer, as well as DNA damage, fertility degradation, and cardiac issues." And he was talking about a new bill rolling out, and he said that this bill subordinates health concerns to those of convenience and economic potential. So that's a state senator from Michigan. Then you have New York Congressman Thomas Suozzi, who recently sent the FCC a letter asking for more information about the technology. He said, quote, "Small cell towers are being installed in residential neighborhoods in close proximity to houses throughout my district. I have heard instances of these antennas being installed on light poles directly outside the window of a young child's bedroom. Rightly so, my constituents are worried that this technology will be proven hazardous in the future and that the health of their families and the value of their properties would be at serious risk." That was New York Congressman. So we got a congressman from Michigan, we got a state senator from Michigan, New York Congressman, New Jersey Congressman Andy Kim. He said current regulations governing radio frequency safety were put in place in 1996 and have not been reassessed for newer generation technologies. Despite the close proximity to sensitive areas where these high-band cells will be installed, little research has been conducted on 5G safety. So again, Michigan State Senator, New York Congressman, New Jersey Congressman, Oregon Representative Peter DeFazio says that he told the House he's the chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He also wrote a letter to the FCC, and he called on the FCC chairman Ajit Pai and acting FDA Commissioner Sharpless to study radio frequency radiation. So those are just 4 examples of. There's also Connecticut State Senator Richard Blumenthal. There's There's a number of them, but you're not going to hear about this on CNN or on any of the mainstream. I'm telling you that these senators on the state level and the local level are asking questions, and some of them are being a little bit more open, saying, hey, we think this is really going to harm my residents. Others are just saying, can we study this first, But the Michigan law passed, and 5G is rolling out in Michigan, despite the concerns of this senator and Dr. Sharon Goldberg. So everything we just covered was all related to the health concerns. As I said there, and I've got a whole list of other studies that don't even have time to get into tonight, but as I mentioned, there are associations with disturbing sleep patterns affecting melanin, down to the DNA level, DNA strand breaks.
And 2 weeks ago, they came out on Channel 11 News about meteorologists are now up in arms because now they're not going to be able to detect the white, fluffy something when they're doing for the hurricanes.
Yeah, we're going to talk about
So they're not
that.
going to be able to pinpoint hurricanes as well as they have. It's going to put them back to 2000 in detecting. And
we're going to talk about that when we get to the environment. Yeah, there's definitely a number of concerns. So on the health, though, I just want to sort of wrap that up just to recap on that. National Toxicology Program study, $35 million over 10 years, finds that 2G and 3G leads to an increase in tumors in male rats, brain tumors, heart tumors. We have the study, the Kaiser Permanente study showing increase in miscarriages near cell towers in San Francisco. We have Dr. Mark Paul and his numerous published studies looking into what he says 15 different ways that EMFs have the potential to affect our bodies and our health. So there's more than a wealth of evidence, I would say, at the least, to slow down and to ask, say here on that local level, why was there never an environmental impact assessment done here? Why was there never any sort of locally, independently funded health study here? They're just going off of, again, the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which is 23 years old and based on old technology. And now we're going to focus on concern number 2, privacy. And this is one that I don't think has been given enough attention because health is obviously important to us, and there's kids here. I know that I've been contacted by a lot of parents who are concerned about this, who are getting these towers put in next in Tanglewood over on the west side. There's literally a 5G tower on the grounds of a middle school right outside the school. And those things are going to continue to happen because that's part of the design. As I said, it has to be installed every 200 to 500 feet. And as important as that is, it's also important for us to take note of the potential loss of privacy that comes along with this Internet of Things and with 5G. So about a year or two ago, the American Civil Liberties Union of California, they released a guide for cities like Houston who are saying they want to be smart cities. The current mayor, he's called for turning Houston into one of the smart cities and the first smart cities in the country. And he said, we want to do this before Dallas, we want to do this before Austin, we want to be #1. And so the ACLU put out a guide called How to Prevent Smart Cities from Turning into Surveillance Cities, discussing the concerns. Because as I said earlier, when we move into 5G and what they're calling the Internet of Things, we're going to have smart everything, smart homes, smart devices everywhere. All these devices have sensors. Many of them have microphones that are capable of recording. So you have a number of threats to your privacy from, let's say, some sort of nefarious government program. Let's say some sort of police thing. Or let's just say the 10-year-old hacker down the street who knows what he's doing and can just hack into your devices. We've also seen things with technology that currently exists, like Alexa, for example,
baby monitors.
Recording people, baby monitors, recording people without their awareness, or people buy, the interconnected, the new CCTV cameras in their house so they can watch the baby in the other room. There's a lot of websites where people are hacking those things. There's literally just people who just watch you in your house all day because they can hack into it. So there's some major security and privacy concerns related to this. So this guide, How to Prevent Smart Cities from Turning to Surveillance Cities, it was written by an attorney with the ACLU of Northern California. His name's Matt Cagle, and I was able to interview him. And in the interview that we did, Matt said, there's a chance, I'm quoting him, there's a chance that 5G could be a wolf in sheep's clothing and allow for an increase in government surveillance. Now, in fact, this is one of the reasons why, if anybody has heard in the news that there's kind of a geopolitical battle going on between Huawei, which is the Chinese company that manufactures a lot of this technology, and American companies, where Trump is saying, we're banning all of the Chinese companies, their 5G, we don't want their 5G equipment because they know it has the capability of being used to spy. So they're claiming, well, the American companies aren't going to do this, but if we take the Chinese companies, it's going to be surveillance. I would be a little more skeptical and just realize that all the technology, whether it's made by an American company or a Chinese company, has the potential to be used for surveillance. And there's even quotes from the former CIA director saying that moving into the smart world was going to help them with their spycraft and being able to turn on devices remotely. And you know, because of the Snowden files and other leaks that have happened over the years, we know that, for example, if you've got a Samsung Smart TV, that they can remotely turn that on. We know that the cell phone microphones can be remotely turned on and off. We know that the webcams can be remotely turned on and off. So just think about the increase in the potential for that when you move into this smart world. And we already have an example of this happening, thankfully. Well, thankfully for us, unfortunately for the people living there. There's this waterfront property, smart city. It's one of the first smart cities called Quayside. And it's 12 acres of waterfront property in Toronto, Canada. And 2 years ago, they signed a deal with this company called Sidewalk Labs, which is owned by Google. So you have some of the same power players in this. And basically, they signed a contract with the city of Toronto to implement the first example of smart city, where they're going to put sensors in the street that can detect pollution. They're going to have smart lights, so if they don't feel a car driving on the street, the lights will turn off to save energy. And there's going to just all these kind of great things. You're going to have fast internet, and they're going to make housing affordable for people. And so it was a partnership between the city of Toronto and Google's parent company, Alphabet Inc., and Sidewalk Labs. And they said they're going to help solve traffic congestion, environmental pollution, rising home costs, and all these kind of things. In the last 2 years, and even more so in the last 6 months, there have already been 2 officials associated with Quayside who resigned over the privacy concerns, who said, despite their best efforts, that their privacy controls are not being put into place. One of these women, her name was Sadia Muzaffar, and she resigned recently, and she said that the advisory board, that she tried to bring in her concerns about privacy, and that they showed apathy and a lack of leadership regarding public trust. And then you have another woman, Anne Kabukian, who is one of Canada's leading experts who they hired to be involved in the Quayside project, and she also resigned because she said that she was initially told that all the data, because this is the thing, you have to imagine all this smart city, all these interconnected sensors. You think this gathers a lot of information about you, this thing alone? I mean, when you search on Google Maps, they gather that data. When you search through your apps, it's gathering all this information. And at the most basic level, they're just trying to sell you advertising, right? They just want to sell you based on what you're searching. And then there are others who use it for different reasons. Facebook also gathers tons of data. So when you're thinking about living in a smart city, everything that you do, every move that you make, one plan also, they said if they see somebody jaywalking through a camera, well, then they see you jaywalking and then they'll send you a ticket through your phone, or mail you a ticket, because they can see everything, because they're interconnected to everything, right? So she said that they have failed to protect residents' data, so they're planning to gather all this data from individuals, and we don't know how we're going to use it. And in her resignation letter, she said the following: I imagined us creating a smart city of privacy as opposed to a smart city of surveillance. So several people involved in that program, look it up, called Quayside in Toronto, and it's been in the news a lot lately because there really hasn't been anything good to say about it. There's been several resignations and people concerned about privacy. So that is a future, I think, that we have the potential to see if Houston is turned into a smart city. And honestly, I think it's probably I would say it's a lot smarter to listen to the concerns of the people of Houston, and again, slow down, exercise the precautionary principle, whether you're talking about the health or the privacy aspect. Because as Matthew Cagle told us, it could be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Me and Miriam have gone to Verizon to talk to them about 5G. If you go to Verizon or a Sprint store right now, just ask them, hey, do you know anything about health concerns, privacy concerns? The only thing they can tell you is that if you sign up today, you get YouTube Red for a discount, you get this phone for this discount, you're going to get your movies faster. They don't know anything, or they're being told not to talk about it. I would guess that most employees are probably just repeating what they're told, and they haven't gone and done the deep look about it. So it's important, because if most people are hearing anything about 5G, it's typically that it's going to be faster, it's going to be better, that kind of thing. People just think it's the latest technology, and so there's a lot of blind trust there. Now we're going to move to local control. We've talked about health, we've talked about privacy. To me, this is one of the most important aspects of it, talking about local control, because this is what's happening here in Houston and all over the place. As I mentioned earlier, that from the very beginning, the 1996 Telecommunications Act, the language in that bill already said that there was limits to how the local governments could act, to whether or not you could test it for health, whether you could test it for environmental causes. And as I mentioned, that in October 2018, the FCC passed a new rule which limits local control even further. And then in March, Donald Trump passed an executive order which further limited local power and said that they have to approve it within 90 days. So you have this ongoing for the last 20 years, this consolidation of power, this collaboration between the FCC and the big telecom, big wireless industry. And I don't know if I said this already, but it should be noted, the current chairman for the FCC, which regulates all the airwaves, the internet, the radio, everything else, his name is Ajit Pai. He was celebrated as the first Indian chairman who was appointed by Obama. He's a former lawyer for Verizon. And most of the people involved in the FCC have worked in the industry. Now, some would say, well, of course, he's got the best experience. He should be in that position. But it's clear that, this is just sort of another corporatist part of our country. So when this rule was passing in October 2018, this is what was reported by the Hill website. All 4 FCC commissioners offered support for the rule, with Democrat Jessica Rosenworcel being the only dissenting vote. So when this was passing, 4 of the commissioners said yes, which were the Republican commissioners, and one of the Democrats, Jessica for the FCC, Jessica Rosenworcel, she spoke out against this. And what she said was, "This is extraordinary federal overreach. I do not believe the law permits Washington to run roughshod over state and local authority like this." And that pretty much says it all. That was what happened in October. You have one of the FCC's own members saying, like, "No, I'm not going to go with this." And it was actually her that said that they expect 800,000 towers. So again, she says, "I do not believe the law permits Washington to run roughshod over state and local authority like this, and I worry that litigation that follows will only slow our 5G future." So she's for 5G. She just thought this rule wasn't a good thing because she knew that there's going to be lawsuits, and that's what's taking place. We're about to get into the lawsuits that are taking place. When that FCC rule passed in 2018, the mayors of Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and others tried to speak up, and not our mayor. In case you guys didn't know, the mayor here in Houston, he's the 5G wireless champion. He was awarded that by Verizon for his role in removing all restrictions locally. But the mayor of LA and the mayor of Philadelphia, they tried to step up and push back against this. There's also the Washington City Council out there. They issued a resolution March 6th. This is probably one of the better examples of a city standing up. A city in California called Danville, California. Their city council voted to block a new permit for Verizon's small cell 5G wireless site. And during the meeting, Danville Mayor Robert Storer said that the vote was an effort to them to stand up to the federal government. And he admitted that they were going to face lawsuits because, as I said, you have a federal law that basically says local governments can't do anything about it. So if the local government, like say Houston, was to say, you know what, we're going to stop this until we do more tests, we would probably face a lawsuit from Verizon, lawsuit from the FCC, and Texas State has a local government code, Chapter 248, which also takes away local power. So you have the state, the federal, and the industry that would all probably sue a city. And so this is what the mayor said when he agreed, because they had this is a small town, about 5,000 people. They were flooded for weeks, all their city council meetings with all these people coming to talk. And so they finally agreed, all right, we're going to stop rolling out the small cell sites until we do more testing. And this is what he said. "We've made a lot of difficult decisions over the years, and this one is right up there in my top 3. But this is exactly why somebody elects us to do the right things. We've lost local control, and this vote says, you know what? We're sick of this, and we're not just going to sit here and be bowled over. We say no. We play our cards out. We've been in lawsuits before." So he's ready to go. That's what's going to happen. And then this is another interesting note. As I said earlier, despite the health concerns typically being people's most, kind of concern, legally, you won't win in a health argument. And this is what the Danville City Attorney Robert Ewing said. "While the potential health concerns are a huge concern, if that was the basis on which you are making a decision, I would be fairly confident to tell you that you will lose, because that's about as clear as the law can get. As much as I understand the concern folks have over safety, I can tell you that if you make a finding based on the potential health impacts of radio frequencies, then I will tell you that my opinion is you will lose. Because the law is set up in such a way that we can't, we can go out and get a study, but legally they won't even take that argument that you can fight on health grounds. We also have Eugene, Portland, and Olympia, Oregon, Olympia, Washington, fighting against 5G and recently passing resolutions. In fact, Portland just passed one a couple weeks ago saying that they were going to sue the federal government until the federal government decided to test 5G. So there is some resistance to this taking place, but again, you're not really hearing about this on the local news or on the mainstream corporate news. And so that's the local control. So now we talk about health concerns, privacy concerns, local control, and I want to mention again the environmental concerns. As Karen mentioned earlier, some of the environmental concerns are that the federal government, the National Oceanic, I can't remember the full name, but they put out a study a couple weeks ago saying that 5G because they want to put up 5G satellites as well. They're basically saying that this increase in all the electromagnetic frequencies is going to interfere with the current weather equipment, and actually they're saying that this could set weather prediction back 30 years and make it much harder for them to predict weather on a positive basis. Now, there are some people who are criticizing that and saying it's not true, but the point is you have a lot of different industries and people coming in and saying, like, this is going to affect us, this is going to harm us. And the other aspect is there are studies that have shown not only negative health effects to us human beings, but to the plants and to the trees and to the animals themselves. And not to mention, as I said, because the millimeter waves only travel so far, they're going to have to cut down a lot of trees. So there's going to be plenty of neighborhoods. Tanglewood, this is one of the reasons they're fighting it, because they have bat colonies in their neighborhood and they have lots of trees that they love. Well, those trees are going to have to get cut down in order to make way, because the millimeter waves are easily blocked. So if you want to have a seamless 5G Internet of Things where you can have driverless cars, it has to work like very quickly, and so you can't have any sort of interruption. So they have to install new cell sites everywhere. Now, another point I want to focus in on is the FCC's corruption. Now, when I talk to people about this, and I'm sure if any of you have had these conversations on social media, you might have got a response from somebody along the following lines. Well, if this was true, then surely they would have tested, right? Or there's no way that this could be true because the government wouldn't have let it happen. Like, there's a sort of belief that the regulatory agencies wouldn't have let this happen, right? And again, that's just not the reality. Now, I mentioned a little bit about how the FCC and Verizon and the industry, they kind of go back and forth, but it goes a little deeper than that. Just this year, Frank Pallone, who's the chairman of the U.S. House Commerce Committee, he sent a letter to the FCC basically saying that the corporations who are involved in the rollout of the 5G technology are starting to file lawsuits to try to avoid being held accountable by local governments. He says, quote, "It has come to our attention that certain individuals at the FCC may have urged companies to challenge the order the FCC adopted in order to game the judicial lottery procedure, and basically would look unfavorably towards entities that were not helpful." So he's saying that the FCC is once again colluding with the industry and encouraging them to file lawsuits. And apparently they have a whistleblower. The House Commerce Committee said they have a whistleblower that spoke up from the FCC. They haven't revealed who it is. It's kind of an ongoing thing. But this whistleblower said, look, they're telling the industry to sue, to file lawsuits, to try to make it as difficult for local governments to resist it. And now this, I think, is probably the key point. Has anybody heard of a paper called Captured Agency? So it came out in 2015, and it was published by the Harvard Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics. So published by Harvard in 2015. It involved some Harvard professors and a journalist named Norman Alster. And it basically exposed the financial ties between the FCC and the wireless industry. It's called, the full title is Captured Agency, How the FCC is Dominated by the Industries It Presumably Regulates. And again, it was released by 2015. And this is just a quote from a bit of that report. It says, "Industry control in the case of wireless health issues extends beyond Congress and regulators to basic scientific research. In an obvious echo of the hardball tactics of the tobacco industry," again, people are comparing this to big tobacco, "the wireless industry has backed up its economic and political power by stonewalling on public relations and bullying potential threats into submission with its huge standing army of lawyers. In this way, the wireless industry intimidated and silenced the city of San Francisco while running over local opponents of its expansionary infrastructure." So this whole Captured Agency report goes deeper into it and shows the connection between the industry and the FCC. And that term, Captured Agency, just means that the agency that's supposed to regulate the industry is controlled by that same industry. And it's kind of all over the United States federal government. It's not just the FCC, unfortunately. And then there's one other key point on this kind of control of the FCC. There was a memo that got leaked from Motorola, which is again involved in wireless technology, and it's called the Wargaming Memo. It's nicknamed that. And it started with a scientist, his name is Jerry Phillips, and he was working for Motorola, and he was doing studies for them. He started to do studies that were showing harmful effects of EMF, and before you know it, he said he lost his job. So he said in the beginning of his work, everything was great, but then once he started to submit research to Motorola that was showing, hey, there's some increase in tumors and there's these kind of things, he said they started to basically tell him to put a spin on his work. And then they started telling him what to do, and then what to write, and then when he wouldn't comply, they fired him. And then this also happened to Dr. Henry Lai at the University of Washington, who in 1995 published a study about DNA and damage to rats exposed to electromagnetic radiation from radar equipment. So not even cell phones, but again, similar spectrum. And a whistleblower leaked an internal memo from Motorola where they discuss wargaming their opponents, where basically they just talk about how they're going to file lawsuits, they're going to go and harass them and just bother them until the scientists either give up, lose their jobs, or change their opinions. And this memo, in the words of Motorola executives, they claimed success in wargaming the professor who found the DNA damage. And basically they just show that they made numerous attempts to discredit peer-reviewed studies and instead to try to get industry-funded studies to be the ones that are promoted. And this is why when somebody's like, well, okay, you name these different scientists, right? But what about the other scientists who say everything's safe and there's nothing to worry about? You definitely need to look into the funding of many of these studies. There's a lot of industry-funded research, and that happens in a lot of different fields. But it's definitely the case when it comes to the FCC and to the FDA and to these industries. Now, my last sort of argument and problem against this, before we get to the solutions, we've talked about health, we've talked about privacy, we've talked about local control, we've talked about the environment, and we've talked about the corruption of the agencies itself. To me, the most basic argument that it comes back to is just what I consider to be self-ownership. The idea that each of us own our bodies, that we are in control of how we medicate ourselves, what we put in our bodies, what we choose to do. And the federal government, the state government, and now the local government have taken away your ability to have that right. Because the thing is, as we're going to get into these solutions, you can say, well, I'm just not going to buy 5G. I'm just not going to buy Sprint's new thing or Verizon's new thing. But if they have to install it on every single block, it won't matter whether you have it or not. Right. You can protect yourself inside your house, but as soon as you go outside, you will still be exposed to it. And if your neighbor chooses to get the latest cell site or welcomes it on their property, then you will deal with that. There's no way to actively avoid it once it's everywhere again. So I think that's an important thing at the kind of the heart of this is this decision is in a big way telling us that we don't care what you want to do with your body, or your body, or your body, or your body, or your family. We don't care about that. We're going to decide that. And so this issue, there's many levels to it. There's the health, there's the privacy concerns, and it really comes down to how corrupt these agencies are. This is how this has been allowed to take place, because there's so much corruption. And there's also, I would say, there's a compliant corporate media that goes along with this. Some of you may have seen an article by the New York Times about a month ago that basically said anybody who questions 5G is falling for Russian propaganda, or is a Russian propagandist, because Russia is trying to convince America that 5G is not safe so that we can fall behind in the race to 5G and, get behind China and Russia and this. So it's just, there's a lot of pushback against people who are questioning these things. And you might once or twice get told to go find your tinfoil hat. Don't be discouraged. Like I said, the documentation is there for anybody who wants this PDF that I'm reading from. I'll send it to you guys. I'll post it on the event tonight. But now we're going to get to the best part, where I think is most important, the solutions to this problem, right? We just covered a lot of information.
I just one question. Are we going to have an opportunity for questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, once I get through this, I definitely will answer questions. You're cool with it. So, solutions. And I divided this up in 4 different ways. So we'll start with personal. What are the personal solutions that you can do to try to protect yourself or defend yourself to these sort of things? I mean, the most basic thing, the most basic thing though, honestly, is to just start to limit your use of technology. As much as this is an everyday part of our life, we have to, if you care about your future, if you care about the health of the children, especially, we have to think about these things. There's been some studies showing women getting breast tumors, and a lot of women happen to put their phones in the drawers, or even say in their front pocket, or men putting their pocket, right here, different things like that. It has an effect, right? So down to your local level, your most personal self, what I would say is don't use Bluetooth headphones. That's one simple thing. Stop using Bluetooth headphones, because Bluetooth operates on the same spectrum as Wi-Fi and as this. So that's one easy thing. Only use speakerphone. So if you're talking to somebody on the phone, it's really not safe to put it right next to your head. And again, that comes from the National Toxicology Program themselves. They said if you're worried about this, talk on speakerphone or just limit your use, because that's the best thing to do, is tell you to stop using it. There's also, Miriam, can you show me your phone? There's this company, and I'm not paid by this company at all, it's just one of the companies we found. They're called Defender Shield, that we met recently. It's a father and son team, and it looks like a basic cell phone cover, but on the inside of the back, there's like a magnetic shielding there, and it helps absorb the EMF. And also when you close it, you can still, like I still wouldn't do this very often, but the idea is that it absorbs not only the heat, so it doesn't get hot, which is another part of the problem, is the heating of the tissue, but also the EMF itself. So this allows for the microphone and the camera to work. And if you look up that company, Defender Shield, they have like stuff like this, but this is just a normal one, but a pad that absorbs for the laptop. They have like glasses, because another thing about these things is the blue light affects our sleep pattern. So if you're staying on the computer or your phone all night and you try to go to bed, you might not be able to sleep that good. It's because your brain thinks it's like the middle of the day.
So put it in airplane mode, and it quits. I've started doing that.
So there are apps that you can get that change the color throughout the day. There's things you can get for your phone, but they have glasses basically that you can wear that kind of blocks the visible light. So those are real basic, simple solutions. And in this one, and I can't necessarily vouch for it because I don't know myself, but I know Karen and a few other people have been getting these. The company is Quantum Science. So and again, like I can't say that I've used this myself or I haven't had time to look into it, but there are others out there.
There's also Q-Link.
Basically,
And you can get a lot of this off Amazon.
people are starting to create devices that they're saying
They're
can
EMF
absorb-
blockers.
EMF
I wear it
absorbers and blockers,
24/7.
which the technology does exist. I just don't know specifically that is that. So okay, switching to speakerphone, not using Bluetooth. Checking out some of the Defender Shield or similar products. The other thing is, if you're using Bluetooth in the car, which a lot of us are increasingly doing in newer vehicles, you're sitting in a metal box that's bouncing the EMF waves around. Apparently that's just going to increase that. Use your aux cord if you can. Put your phone on airplane mode. The whole time I've been holding my phone here, it's been on airplane mode, so I'm not just like sitting here absorbing it while I'm talking to you guys about this. And the other thing, don't sleep with your phone. Stop taking, try to just get in the habit of having, like what we do is we stop bringing the devices into the bedroom for the most part at all, because, it's really easy to do that. I spend so much time already on the computer, and I try to just, at the end of our night, what we do, and this is personal but also in the house, we unplug the Wi-Fi too, because there's no reason for the Wi-Fi to be just running all night while you're sleeping, and again, that's affecting your sleep patterns. It affects melatonin, and that's gonna lead to stress. That can lead to oxidation of the cells and other things. Now, along with that, besides just unplugging the Wi-Fi at night, one of the things you can do is to take steps to rewire your house. So you can actually send back your Comcast modem, and if you want to go to the store, you can buy one that has a bunch of slots for Ethernet cables. And yeah, you might have some cables running around your room, but actually being plugged in is faster in a lot of ways. It's funny how we've been kind of pushed towards wireless for the convenience, but sometimes you still have crappy signal, but you can just plug in directly to the modem. And that way you can turn off your Wi-Fi, you can turn off the Wi-Fi on the router. Instead, you just, it's just old school Ethernet cables into your laptop or whatever. So we have that we try to use at home. Dr. Martin Paul also said that he was recommending, and apparently it's kind of expensive, but graphite paint indoors. But then the other thing about that is that can protect you from things coming from the outside. But let's say you just do the whole house in graphite paint and then you're on your cell phone, where you're kind of just bouncing the signal in and around yourself. So, I mean, you got to figure that one out. But there are people who are starting to think of these kind of things, like different types of ways to work within the house. And one other big one is the smart meter, which operates on the same technology. And a lot of people
have a basket you can put over that.
A lot of people have been pushing back against that. Sometimes it's as simple as just calling the electric company and telling them you want your analog one back. If you have a house and you own the house, and you can actually do that. If you live in an apartment building where you're surrounded by all kinds of other smart meters, you're pretty limited on what you can do with that, right? But again, I would start looking into, what were you saying, Karen, what you can put on?
So there's a basket that you can actually put over it that slows it down. Because when my AT&T guy came out to redo the cable, and he had some little toy that would test, he put it up because I was complaining about it, talking about it, and he says, oh yeah, he says, if I take that off, he said, yeah.
So
But
I'm sure
the other thing I was going to talk about, I read recently, is your mattress that you sleep on.
Oh,
If
yeah.
there's metal in it.
Yeah, there's actually
They now have a new EMF-free, I don't know.
There's a company that the same time we met the companies, the Defender Shield, they're called Samina, and they make beds.
That's it.
They're really, they look like really awesome bamboo beds, so they're going to cost you a penny or two. But what she's saying is basically, instead of having the traditional metal frame bed, which again is also absorbing the EMFs, and then that's going into affecting your sleep. They have an all bamboo bed, and then they have a sheet at the bottom. I can't remember what material they put in it, but basically you can put your phone underneath the bed, and you can put an EMF detector above it, and there's
Won't
nothing
register.
coming through because it's absorbing, the pad's absorbing it, and it's not going into your body. So there are more and more companies out there, again, like Samina, Samina, they've been really supportive of my efforts to try to get people to pay attention to this, and they're all about it. Again, some people are just, they see what's going on, and then they're motivated to try to create a product that helps. You know, it's like, hey, let's make a bed that doesn't radiate you while you're sleeping. Let's make a phone case that can help protect you and things like that. And then, so we talked about personal and in the home. What about in public? Like I said, when you go out in public, you know, especially with 5G, there's going to be more and more cell sites and towers. It's going to be harder to avoid it on that level. And that's why we're making such an effort right now, because once it rolls out, it's going to be a lot harder to try to say, hey, we want to take this down, but we can maybe slow it down a little bit. And I will say, though, that there are some companies out there and people that are starting to talk about, it's like all the jokes are finally coming true, like protective headgear and things like that. Your literal tinfoil hat is now coming into play. But there's also, I did see some other companies that are suggesting that clothing that has some type of material in it that can also absorb.
That has some sulfur
Oh yeah.
in there.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
things like
Claudia interviewed
like
with him, and it's some silver salt,
something like
and
that.
it's not, but it rejects.
So I would, again, do your research, do your homework. Don't just blindly trust anybody out there that's claiming they got a device that's going to protect you. One thing that's important to get, I haven't got yet, I would say invest in an EMF detector, because you can really go around your house and say, go up to your Wi-Fi thing and see how much it's putting out, because it's not like it's just next to it. They're putting out a big electromagnetic field. We all put out an EMF field, an extra electromagnetic field. But these devices, you can go up to the smart meter and think, wow, this is coming all the way.
They're not that expensive either on
Yeah, they're
Amazon.
not.
Where do you get them? And don't tell me Amazon.
Amazon like $30 to $50.
You can,
Anywhere besides it, I don't.
Walmart, Amazon.
Thank you. I hate Walmart, but I will not be
I
around.
hate them slightly less than Amazon. So okay.
Screw Bezos.
So going into public is a little bit more tricky. Like I said, we're just gonna have to figure out these solutions. Hopefully the solution is that we can slow it down so we don't have to deal with it in the first place. And then in the community, so we talked about your personal devices, your home, your community, the public. Now on the community level, what is the solution? Lawsuits, honestly. This is where I think it's gonna have to go for it to really happen. And one of the communities that we're seeing that's already fighting, there's a page, if you haven't found it yet, called Protect Tanglewood. It's the Tanglewood neighborhood, but I also know that, you know, earlier you were telling me about your HOAs kind of getting interested, and I've heard from a few other people around the city who have HOAs who want me to come talk to them, or they're getting interested. Because if we can't get the city council to go along with doing anything, then the next step is to try to get your neighborhood council, your HOA, your subdivision, to say, hey, we don't want these in our, in our site, in our community. And again, that probably would lead to lawsuits. The thing about Tanglewood is they're a fairly wealthy neighborhood. They can afford to hire a lawyer and say like, oh, we're gonna fight this in court. So they might be the first ones in the city of Houston to do that. But I think that's where we need to focus on, or I would encourage focusing on, is getting involved at the community level, talking to your HOAs, talking to your neighborhood groups, your subdivision, whatever sort of local groups you got, because that might be the most effective way. And this leads me to the very end. How can we take action in Houston? What can we do specifically in Houston? And first off, thank you guys for hanging out tonight, for the patience.
Sure.
I know I just dropped a lot of information, but I appreciate you guys staying with me. So as I said, July 2018, Mayor Sylvester Turner, he stood with Verizon Wireless officials downtown and announced the plans for the rollout of 5G in Houston. This was last summer, so it's only been a year that they've announced it going on. And he said he's going to turn the city into a smart city, better traffic flow, driverless cars, smart street lights, all these kind of things. So that was July. By September, Mayor Turner was awarded the 5G Wireless Champion Awards by the CTIA, which is, again, the Cellular Telephone Internet Association, funded by Verizon and Sprint. And they basically said, this is their quote, the CTI said, under Mayor Turner's leadership, Houston has streamlined the permitting process by not requiring a license or attachment agreement for new poles or small cells and completing reviews ahead of deadlines. So he's working so hard and fast for them, they gave him this Wireless Champion Award. And then October 1st, which is when I first got involved in this, Mayor Turner held a press event, and this was over here off Washington Street, where they announced the world's first 5G customer. It was this really young couple, and they had the CEO of Verizon, they had Mayor Turner, and I went there, and I asked both of them to their face. I said, what do you say about health concerns and privacy concerns. They both said, we have no idea what we're talking about. As far as we know, there are no concerns, right? This new couple has all the new smart devices, and they show them getting, everything. They're like, everything in this house is powered by this one 5G device. So, it's clear that on the local level, our concerns are not being heard. As I said, I've been going to council for 9 months now. Up until just 3 days ago, none of the council members, save for Jack Christie, who is he's a chiropractor. He cares about health. He typically will always stand for health stuff. But until just this past Tuesday, every single council member has ignored every email I've sent, every phone call. Not just me. We've had groups of people emailing them, phone calling, sending them all kinds of things. I've been sending press releases every week to them. Every time there's a new study, I send it to them. Every time there's a new article or something new, I send it to them. And now that it's election season, and I think now that I'm running for mayor as well and making this an election issue, all of a sudden they're ready to talk. I also think it does show that there's progress. Like I said, there's other cities that are starting to push back. So it's starting to become a national issue that they can't just simply dismiss anymore. And I think that's good, So as I mentioned, we have Protect Tankwood, who is fighting. They're filing potential lawsuits. I encourage everybody to get involved on the local level to see what we can do. And for those who are interested in supporting my campaign for mayor, this is definitely a central piece of why I'm running. There's other issues that are extremely equally important to me, but this is something that's taking place right now, like I said. And so to me, I felt like the reason I wanted to run was because they were ignoring me when I go to do my 2 or 3 minutes at city council. The mayor gets up and walks away, or they tell me next, your time's up, or whatever. But I've already been accepted into 5 of the debates. That means I will be on the stage with them, and that means that I will make sure these ideas get discussed. So all I'm saying, thank you, brother. All I'm saying is if you support this, if you want to hear more about this, and make sure that for the next 5 months that this issue is discussed, then I invite you to check out our campaign and see what we're doing. This also today is day 5. We've been doing 7 events in 7 days, just trying to show people, what we want to do in the community. We've done interviews this week. We went to city council. We've volunteered with Food Not Bombs, feeding the homeless. Yesterday we had a group out there cleaning up the bayou. We're doing this tonight. We have a concert fundraiser tomorrow night, and Sunday we're doing outreach. So we're just trying to hit the streets and talk to people. And again, I really appreciate everybody's time making the effort to be here tonight. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I definitely, you dropped a lot of information on us, so I felt like I had a question for almost everything you said.
So we can take it.
But I can't remember it all, so there's a couple key points that I would like to capitalize on. And well, first of all, do you think that we're so tuned into technology today, it's almost like we could exist without it, but we don't function as a society without our smartphone, without our internet. I wouldn't even know who you are without the internet. I found out about you about a week ago. I found out about the 9 things you were about, and that really drew us to you. So my question is do you think that 5G is something that not the general population, but the higher elites, so-called elites, do you think it's weaponized intentionally for some kind of nefarious reason? Or do you think that they are just completely ignorant and they think that it's going to help their corporations? Or is it kind of mixed bag of both?
Let me respond to that. So just for those who couldn't hear him for the live stream, his question was, do I think that more than just being the latest, tell me if I'm repeating it right, more than just being the latest technology, but that there's a potential for the people in control of this infrastructure to weaponize it and use it. Right? So I failed to mention this in the information, but the spectrum that 5G operates on, the millimeter waves, it has been weaponized by the Department of Defense. I'm sure you're aware of this.
Yeah.
It was developed by the Department of Defense as a crowd control weapon. And so they haven't, we don't see it on the streets of America yet, but we know that they have the technology. What it basically means is that they can, say you're marching in the streets, they blast millimeter waves at you, you'll start feeling a heating of the skin. And it's a very easy way to push back protesters or whatever. So we do know that this technology and this specific part of the spectrum could be used as a weapon. So there are those who are concerned that, hey, it's not just about privacy, it's not just about this, but once all this is installed, it could be used as a weapon. Like I said earlier, there are concerns about security. Let's say if the concerns about China are real, right? The government's saying China is going to use 5G to spy on everybody. Of course, the US government could do the exact same thing, but they're saying it's just China, right? So let's imagine that China or any other nation hacked the entire 5G grid. They could weaponize that. Like you could have it essentially used as what is called a directed energy weapon.
Right.
Now, the reason I don't really get too much into that, I'm willing to go into that tonight, is because, and I'm sure as you guys know, it's hard enough to get people to look into the most basic things, let alone saying, hey, I think this thing could be a weapon or something worse. And I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying it's, and I'm sure you understand it, it's hard to get people to even think that, as you said, we use it every single day, you found it through the internet, but I think that there's ways for us to be smarter about it, right? Like, do we really need to know how many likes we have on Facebook every minute of every day? You can turn the airplane mode on for an hour while you're hanging out with your family, and you turn it back off.
Well, it's an addiction.
It is an addiction. That's a big part of this.
It's a super addiction, and it worries me. And we talk about 5G, but there's also 4G and 3G, 2G. Those are all first addiction.
Yeah.
But it's like, is it an advancement on our evolutionary spectrum of, as far as technology goes, or is it a disadvantage? Like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like,
well, I mean,
we have people like Elon Musk wanting to do the neural links to upload our consciousness to computers, and
so
it gets really wild.
I will say that, look, I'm not anti-technology by any means. Obviously, we're live streaming here. Like you said, I use the internet to broadcast these ideas, but I personally do think that because of how just immersed into our everyday world technology has become, that there's not enough skepticism, I'll say that, right?
Yeah.
There's such an embrace to just move forward. But at the same time, I honestly haven't seen that many people clamoring for 5G. Like, it's more being pushed on it. They're like, hey, driverless cars, faster phones, and I don't see people out in the street saying my phone's too slow, where's the next generation?
Exactly, that's what I'm thinking.
So it's an industry push. You have to understand that the CTIA, the telecom industry, they created what they call the global race to 5G. So they created this whole propaganda campaign.
Yeah.
It's time to raise the
And the investment.
Okay, so hold on for 1 minute, because I wanted to ask, where is China on 5G? Where is Russia on 5G? Are they racing too, or are we the only country that's racing towards?
China is building their own 5G network. Russia is also building a 5G network. Parts of the European Union are kind of posting up. Switzerland has had a lot of protests, and they've been slowing down. Brussels banned it. So there's Australia. There's a lot of people fighting in Australia. There's actually a lawyer out in Australia who's been helping people fight it in different cities and having success. So there is pushback in there.
Yeah. So I'll have one more question, because I got a bunch more, but I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes. But if it is intentionally, I'm so sorry.
You're fine, man.
Mama, we need your help. I need your help. Okay.
Oh, that's all you. Just need some shock.
If it was
needed
an intentionally weaponized device by the elite, whatever. I know that's so cliche to say.
No, I don't understand
whatever, but you mean it exists. Is it just for information, or is it for health reasons? Because if it's just for information, I could understand that sticking point. But if it's to affect our health, wouldn't it not also affect their health? And why are they not worried about that?
So his question was that, why would the people in control of the people that are pushing 5G do so if obviously the health concerns are just, I've heard this from many people, well, don't they live in the same world as us? Don't they have children as well?
Right.
I mean, I don't know. We can speculate on, maybe they got the secret protection device we don't know about, or who the heck knows? I don't know. But I do know that it's being pushed forward at such a pace that, it seems like there's an agenda to make 5G happen one way or the other. And it's part of, like I said, the smart grid, the smart cities we talked about earlier in Toronto. And that's just sort of, it's been pushed through. In Houston, it's called the Complete Communities Initiative. There's other plans in other cities and on a federal level. Yeah. But it's a vision that the government is pushing, this idea of smart cities. And some reason they say it's going to help with the environment, it's going to help with pollution. But obviously, there's a lot of concerns about it. Yeah. So I don't know. I can't really speculate too much.
Well, okay. I said I was going to answer my questions. But okay, I am.
All right, one more, and we gotta.
I'm gonna pull this part out.
Hold on just a minute, let her ask the question.
I just have two comments. I'm of a generation where my bank told me they couldn't load their house on the phone. Okay, it's so old. But I have just become used to, okay, here's a 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. I mean, I think that people don't think anything about it. It's just like, okay, well, there's a 4, now there's a 5, there's a 2, you know, it's like.
Just a new year model, you know?
Yeah, but what I was curious about is how much additional power will this give the government to shut down communications among the masses?
Well, I think that's a very important point to make because, like you said, they're sort of pushing it, you know, people just accept, well, we got a new iPhone coming. Well, this is just going to be the next 5G. 5G, because of what we're seeing right now is essentially the corporate takeover of the infrastructure of the future. With all the local power being taken away, we can't even decide whether we want to test it.
Well, I mean, you know, after everybody's phones were shut down.
Yeah.
And everybody's thinking, oh, the towers are out. The towers weren't out. We were out.
Yeah. I think it's definitely a big concern that if.
I mean, when you went digital, you took away communication.
Yeah. They did it with the TVs as well. They did it with, I mean, this could be used in a way that I think that telecommunications infrastructure could be taken down, whether by the government or, again, they talk about hackers or this, that. Let's say some party, some nefarious party, whether that be government or other entity or an actual terrorist or somebody, could seize control of the 5G network because it's going to be so invasive and so it's basically going to be penetrating every aspect of our lives. And again, if it's connecting to the smart home, there's already been some news reports where these smart homes, people get locked out of their own house because somebody hacked it or because it's not functioning. You know, so imagine that you were all living in this smart grid of interconnected driverless cars and smart homes. If somebody gets control of that, they can decide when you get out of your house or whether that car starts.
Well, I just want to know if I can call somebody. That's more my question. If it will give me even more power than already is present for shutting down telecommunications.
I think so. I think it will.
What's that my transistor?
Well, that's what I was gonna say. We can go back. We can use ham radios. We can use smoke signals.
CB radios.
CB radios. Pigeon, carrier pigeons. Did you have a question?
I was just going to say that their communication companies are actually their Verizon's advertising is be the person using to get 5G.
Yeah.
So they're making this statement.
And they're selling it cheap too.
Yeah.
They're selling it for very
So
cheap.
I've been following you for some time actually since you first started talking against 5G. We're following your very first interview about how you were trying to get the mayor to comment about it. He wouldn't say a word.
Yeah.
He wouldn't say
He runs.
Yeah, he runs. And basically, I just wanted to say about, I did the research on Michigan, and one of your first reports was how you had studied Michigan, and you actually saw a film over the city of the 5G.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say that I am interested in, because I drive to Lynn, so I'm able to talk to a lot of different people all day long.
Awesome.
And I've been trying to build awareness about 5G and how it's affected people even today.
You're welcome to take any of the flyers we have, everything. And if any, like I said earlier, there's a group of Houstonians concerned with 5G. If you haven't joined yet, that's just a way to communicate with other people.
But I did have a question. Aside from you, are there any other local politicians that are trying to fight against it?
Well, they're trying to follow my lead. It's funny that in the last week, somebody from Tony Busby's campaign wanted to meet with me. Dwight Boykin, who's a city council member, who's also running for city council, he wants to meet with me in 2 weeks. And, I care about making this an issue one way or the other, whether or not I become mayor or not. That's what's like the bigger picture to me, for sure. But I don't really trust these other people to actually do it. I think what's happening is, like I said, I went to city council on Tuesday, and now all of a sudden they're talking about it. I think they realize that people are concerned, and so they're trying to make sure they don't fall behind. I personally don't trust them. Like, I don't trust that Tony Busby's really going to follow up with this fight. Dwight Boykins might be more legitimate. Bill King has already said he supports it. The mayor obviously supports it. So honestly, I honestly think I'm the only one that's legitimate about this. And when you look at the history, I've been fighting this, as you know, since last fall and before. And now they're just trying to jump on board and say that they're concerned, and maybe they're legitimately just learned. But I do know this: I've been sending emails and phone calls for almost a year now, and nobody said anything until this week. And that means something to me. That means they weren't interested before, and now they're feeling the pressure, and they decide it's time to speak, and they know they're up for re-election too. So.
Well, I just want to say I appreciate what you're doing, and I recommend that we all try to help him in every effort that he.
Honey, I'm one of his biggest volunteers.
Yes.
See me at every
Because
event.
how are we gonna answer to our children in 25 years, 30 years from now, after they've been living in this 5G for all this
I
time?
have a 2 to 3 year old grandbaby. At this rate, if we don't take something, I'm not gonna see those girls graduate high school. We're not gonna see this baby get married. We're not gonna see this baby go to college because there's not gonna be here.
And he spoke on some of the health issues, but he didn't say anything about the stress that this is causing, the anxiety, the depression that this is causing.
Yeah, there's definitely there's studies that look
It makes
into depression
PTSD
and
worse,
stress.
so on and so forth. Makes depression really bad.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? I mean, we can just hang out for a little bit, but if anybody has anything specific, I appreciate that. I definitely appreciate the support. And yeah, I'm just trying to use this race to raise awareness on 5G because I think, and not just that, but because it's so imperative that right now we do something before it is too late. Because it'll be a lot harder to fight it once they're all in place.
I have a question now. Okay, so you said 800,000 towers.
Yep.
Is that in Houston, Texas, United States?